Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tyler Johnson. Thank you for joining us. This is the first time we've tried this format out, but I think it's going to be beneficial. Our goal today really is to just get a little deeper into certain areas of our business. The business itself, the process itself is very complicated, but the more you understand in how each of those really kind of fundamental tenets of the process work, how best to navigate it, how best to position yourself, the customer, this is just going to be a much better experience, right? So knowledge is power, and today we're going to get deep on collateral and appraisals. So first things first, let's establish some credibility. That's why I've got Neal here. Neal has been with Home Services for 5.5 years, right?
Yep.
We started on the same day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
September 15th, 2014.
A day that will live in infamy.
So prior to that, you owned your own shop, you were in the field.
Yeah, over 30 years as an appraiser in the field. 20 plus of those years my own firm with a staff of appraisers. So saw a lot of properties.
Do you miss it?
There are times, depending on the day and month end and that sort of thing. Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Neal, I mentioned before, but just to reiterate it, appraisals, just like everything else, and one of the things that I think we do a really good job as an organization is just using a common sense approach to how we go about business. So if we can't explain it to an agent, to a customer, then there's something wrong, because it's not rocket science. It's really just a matter of understanding how it works, what to expect, and setting those right expectations, I think, goes a long ways. So we'll get into some of the tips, the tricks, different things that I think are going to be valuable to you as agents. One of the things that I think is really important is that every market is absolutely unique. Every neighborhood is absolutely unique.
Yes.
However, every single appraiser is governed by the same set of requirements and expectations in terms of how they should be going about their business. And so regardless of if we're looking at an appraisal in Minnesota, Maryland, Tennessee, Nebraska, there are principles that should be followed, and in theory, the report itself should be self-contained so that anyone, anywhere can pick it up and say, this makes sense and this is how the appraiser is reconciling to their value.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that end, that's part of what I do and our collateral group as a whole, is to ensure that there's consistency in the process, regardless of who that appraiser is. Not only the compliance for buzzwords like USPAP and that sort of thing for those in the appraisal industry in the know, but the process itself. We understand that appraiser vendor we're engaging is an extension of us. And so they need to follow a consistent process to ensure that we really get this product right.
So when you talk about the appraiser being an extension of us, the appraisers are an independent third party. They don't work, they're not on the lender's payroll, and that they are an employee. We contract out and we are finding appraisers, we're building the panel, but they're independent. They're a third party, which we need that impartiality for the assignments. But from a consumer's perspective, there's no difference between the appraiser, the lender, the loan officer. It's all one, and therefore it's really important that the appraisers that we're choosing to use are appraisers that have the highest quality, that treat us as a priority, and are the ones that we have a level of confidence because of their demonstrated performance.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's sort of the beauty of when you commit to building your own panels in these different markets throughout the nation, being able to have better control of who are these vendors that you're engaging and tracking their performance with tangible metrics. So that's exactly what we do.
Cool, and so just to give everyone a little perspective, when we talked about credibility and experience, Neal's the guy here. I had my appraiser license, but it was a trainee. I never actually once visited a property, so I just played an appraiser on TV, pretended to be one behind the scenes. With that, my experience prior to a couple, what feels like a lifetime ago, was working for an appraisal management company. And so my experience has been working with that broker, conduit, however you want to describe it, between the lender and the appraiser. And I thought we were really important and we were doing a really noble, serviceable job. But the reality is that, like you mentioned, that investment from a lender's perspective to reach directly out to the appraisers is a more expensive, more time-consuming process. But you're going to get better quality because we don't have a middleman that is taking a percentage of the fee, and you're not relying on someone to communicate on our behalf to the appraiser what our expectations are. And so even though it's less convenient, it's far better for the overall experience.
Yeah, and from my past experience in the field, I did work for an appraisal management company, and I had clients that were direct engagement. What was my preference? Absolutely working directly with that lender, not only from a fee and dollar and cents perspective, but as you mentioned, being able to bring common sense into it. Can I talk to a live body of somebody who understands maybe the challenges that I'm experiencing with this particular assignment and how to deliver the best product out of the gate to us? And that's where we're able to do that now through our process.
So let's go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, and we're just going to go on tangents throughout this. We're just kind of shooting from the hip here. When you're talking about having that conversation with someone and setting those expectations, I think there's a common misconception that as an agent, that you can't have conversations with the appraiser and help kind of define what is appropriate and what's not, because obviously we don't want any undue influence or threats that you have to come in X, Y, and Z. But as an appraiser, would you welcome an agent saying, here's how we came to our sales price, here's the information that we're relying on? No pressure, but where is that fine line? How can you?
Yeah, I think first we need to understand that there are no rules or regulations out there through Dodd-Frank or USPAP that prohibit agents from talking to appraisers. The caveat to that is, while that assignment's still in process and hasn't been delivered to the client, the appraiser is tasked with gathering as much information as they can. How is that property marketed? The best resource for that? The listing agent. So in common everyday practice, the truly competent and credible appraiser should be proactively trying to gather that information from the agents. But real world, we know just like all agents aren't created equal, all appraisers aren't created equal.
Yep.
So sometimes we've got to kind of be proactive as agents on that side to say, hey, here's best practice. I've got this information here, factual market data I want to present to you. And appraisers should be open and receptive to receiving that.
So that kind of goes back to also the appraisal report having to be self-contained in the sense that it needs to make sense. You need to show your work, and if we've got alternative sales or information that wasn't included, wasn't addressed by the appraiser, they absolutely should be able to address that and say either here's the information you don't know and why I didn't consider it, or here's why it's not more relevant than different sales that I'm using because we're bracketing certain salient features or different things like that, correct?
Yes,
okay.
And ideally we like that information that, say, agents have to support their marketing of the property to get in the hands of the appraiser up front or at the time of inspection so that it can be incorporated into the development of that initial delivered report. We all know that doesn't always happen. And so when that's the case, we do have a process in place to say, hey, okay, you've got an opportunity to present this information here.
Sure.
And we do that through a couple of different processes. One is that we do hard stop everything in our platform that is what we call a sales variance. And what do I mean by that? So any appraisal that comes in below contract price and any appraisal that comes in more than 10% over contract price, those will be hard stopped in our system, and we'll take a deep dive into them by qualified reviewers that happen to be appraisers working internally for us specifically in this role.
I love that. So if it's an anomaly or something that's kind of out of that general threshold, it's a red flag. We're automatically doing that instead of waiting for someone to say, hey, this doesn't seem right. We know that there's probably something there. When we're talking about the review process in looking at using appraisers to complete the review, one of the other aspects that I think is really cool is the technology and the data that's available to us. And just you can speak to this from when you owned your own shop and you're out in the field 6 years ago to where we're at today, how much that data is coming into play and how much a lot of those automated valuation models are kind of influencing or being leveraged in certain cases.
I don't think there's an appraisal today, regardless of loan type, that comes into a lender's hands that hasn't gone through some sort of automated scrub. Most common, obviously, in those conventional appraisals, they're going to go through the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac appraisal portal and come up with a collateral underwriting risk score along with messaging and flags. And all of that information is extremely transparent through the loan process now, including exactly that final package that goes out to the secondary market too. We need to proactively address those things sometimes and build the case why we're good with it the way it is, or can we do something to help mitigate that? And again, that's where myself and my team come into play, so that we ideally close this loan with the right appraisal, minimizing risk for both us and the consumer, the agents, and everybody involved.
So the right appraisal, in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, the happy path is getting a local market appraiser that's competent and understands what the influences are in the neighborhood or the city, right? Where you could be licensed in Minnesota, you've got access to multiple MLSs. You can look at the data and say, here's generally, comparable homes based off of a lot of the different amenities, the size, the square footage, but you don't know that on this street, on this quarter, there might be some external obsolescence or influences, right, that are impacting that value, which is why I think, again, to stress our direct-to-appraiser panel is so key, because it's only people that are familiar. And just because you're licensed in Minnesota, because we're in Minnesota, doesn't mean that you should be driving from Minneapolis to Duluth or Alexandria or Wilmer or Hutchinson to perform that appraisal just because you can.
Yeah. So we have some parameters in place, and our system is set up to, wherever possible, follow these. If we're in an urban setting, we like that appraiser to be within 5 miles preferably. Yep. If we're in a suburban setting, that might extend out to 10 miles. We get out into the more rural locations, it might go as far as 30 plus miles. It's important to understand that there's a finite pool of quality appraisers out there, and we're a lender like any other, competing to gather their quality services. And so, again, direct engagement, being able to pay direct top dollar to those appraisers and have a relationship that we set up with them, one built on consistent business that we provide to them, and their feedback loop to us in terms of delivering us a quality product is valuable. And I can't tell you the interactions and the number of times I've had with appraisers, appraiser to appraiser interactions, that they're not going to get from another lender, where their response has been, I never knew. And it's translated for them to be able to deliver a quality product, not only to us, but out to the industry as a whole too.
Yeah. I've heard in the offices from the broker managers, from the agents, that the appraisers love to work with us, and it's pretty obvious why. We make it easy, we give them their full fee, and one of the other things I think that's really important, especially now, this time of year, is we're going into spring market. Regardless of where you're at, we're going to start seeing some extended turn times. Now, if we're really important to appraisers in the market that we're working with closely, we're going to continue to get priority over other shops. And if you're going through a national lender, they are absolutely using an appraisal management company, which means that they're relying on appraisers that are going to accept the assignment at reduced fees. They're probably going to go extended distances, and in turn you're going to have extended turn times, not only with delivery, but also with the number of revisions that are going to take place to get that report. So if you're here in 45, 60 days out, and that's the norm, then you need to be asking yourself a question of, why is that the case? Is it self-inflicted, or what's really happening there? And I think that that's something that we've got a heads up on everybody else. And not to go on a rant here, but we are a predominantly purchase company in terms of a lender, right? So we work exclusively for our real estate brands, our real estate agents. These other fly-by-night lenders that are really focusing on refis, they're going to have a good 6 to 9 month run, maybe a year. They're going to be gone, and the appraisers know that we're going to be in it for the long haul. We're the largest real estate company in the country, and so those relationships that we're developing are just going to continue to get stronger and stronger with the appraisers.
You hit on a key thing there. I think that, again, we talk about the finite pool of quality appraisers out there and demands for their services. When you're a valued partner like we are, they're going to prioritize our orders. And that is a good segue. I think we kind of talk about what can agents do maybe
Yeah.
to have that successful engagement with appraisers out there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Lay it on
I
us.
think as we go into this spring market, and we've said this probably for at least 3 consecutive years now, as we go into this spring market, that kind of low inventory, strong sellers market, high prices, that sort of thing. What can an agent do to maybe help with the process to have that successful appraisal outcome? I think first and foremost, we need to be proactive wherever possible. Get out there, try to meet the appraiser at the property, get a sense of, yep, this is a quality individual out here, this is a professional, this is going to treat me professionally and respect my data and market CMS, that sort of their CMA, I'm sorry, that I've come up with here to establish the marketing of this property. So be proactive. When you present information to an appraiser, present it objectively. Stick to the facts. You certainly can sprinkle in some opinion if you walk through some of these properties that isn't telling the whole story through the MLS listing, that kind of thing. That's certainly welcome. You just want to avoid undue influence and steering. In other words, telling the appraiser what to do with that information, and avoid the term comparables. That's the appraiser that is going to determine comparables. Agents try to stay away from that terminology.
So, I know that when you're saying stay objective, what's the litmus test there for, crossing that line? Is it as easy as saying if you are concerned that you may be crossing that line, then you absolutely probably are, and to take a step back? Is it as easy as that?
Go with your gut on that one.
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely. Some other things, ready the property. So I think it's important as a listing agent, you understand what type of offer the buyer is bringing to the table. Is it conventional? Is it FHA, VA, that sort of thing? And regardless of the loan type, have the property ready for the appraiser, meaning are the utilities on, that sort of thing? Are all of the spaces readily accessible? Detached structures. If there's value going to be assigned to that space, then the appraiser should probably have full access to it whenever possible.
Yep. So when you're talking the difference between conventional, FHA, VA, let's start there, those 3, because I think you can kind of draw some clear differences. So, conventional appraisal, in terms of the appraiser's scope and what they're looking for, they should be looking at and reconciling their value, as is, unless there are health and safety issues. Is that really that one item, that health and safety issues are the ones that all appraisers are going to look for? But other than that, it should be, they're going to be less, not concerned, but less focused on minor items like an FHA appraisal where it's going to be peeling paint, or other items that are going to require, final inspection. What would that look like?
The old adage was we had the 3 S's, so it was safe, sound, secure. And that is still applicable for conventional financing now. When you hear those terms, they're pretty broad and pretty general, and certainly open to interpretation. And I think the notion is, and it is a true one, that if you're doing conventional financing, the interpretation of the 3 S's is more conservative, that we just say, look, unless something is glaring and poses an imminent safety issue for the occupants, that appraisal should be as is.
Yep.
FHA, obviously, we hold a whole set of other different guidelines regulated by HUD. Most particular that everyone knows about is peeling paint on homes built before 1978. So,
what are some of the most common safety items that you're seeing conventional FHA? What comes to mind for me are lack of handrails, or maybe there's not a deck, but you've got the that was built, but you got the doors leading out to it that you need to 100%. Secure. What are the
that has kind of been the biggest one I've seen lately, has been handrails on stairs and guardrails, understanding the distinction between them for drop-offs from decks that are more than 30 inches in height. Same with open side staircases. Hey, we have a handrail on this side, but the whole other side of the staircase is wide open. And I think as an agent, sometimes you kind of lose sight of this, and you think about maybe who's going to buy this house type of financing, rather than, hey, if I was living here, would I have a concern with this? Would I have a concern with either my small child or grandma coming over here in this space? And again, trust your gut a little bit there. If you have a concern with that, maybe that's something you can proactively address before we get the appraiser out there.
So On that note, actually, before two things, I don't want to forget it, but VA appraisals. So VA appraisals are a little bit of a different beast because the VA appraiser is the judge, jury, and executioner, right?
To some degree. They're sort of locked in a time machine.
Okay.
I won't lie to you. We don't control that platform like we do with the
No lender
conventional
does, though,
FHA.
right?
No lender
No
does.
lender does, yep.
Yep, everything is ordered through the VA portal online and random selection process. You get who you get.
Okay.
They work different counties, that sort of thing. VA appraisals, that appraiser tends to be a little more stringent, obviously, generally speaking, following FHA guidelines. They apply to the home. But in terms of, say, value reconsideration, that follows its own path. They have a tidewater process involved in that sort of thing. It's a very formal process where you have a 48-hour window to provide sales back, that sort of thing. When it works correctly, you should not be surprised by a VA appraisal coming in below contract price. You should be alerted ahead of time and be given that opportunity to provide that information within that window of time. Not all lenders realize that. They kind of figure it's just cut in stone. This is it, and I don't have a voice. You do have a voice. In particular with the VA, the vet borrower is really the driver there. And the VA understands, hey, we want to do what's right for the vet. So something to keep in mind.
And I totally forgot what I was going to say before I went off. I should really make some notes. I've just got a blank piece of paper here. So with the appraisal, with the contracts that are being provided to the appraiser's required to analyze the purchase agreement every single time.
Yeah, it kind of relates back to, we talked about these tips for successful engagement. One of them, down the road I've got on my tip sheet, is if you're the listing agent, I would not be self-reliant necessarily on saying, hey, that lender provided the final contract terms to the appraiser doing the assignment. In a perfect world, that happens, but we all know it doesn't always get there, and you're missing the final addendum and that sort of thing. So be proactive. When the appraiser gets there, at least if you're not going to share the final contract addendum, verbally say, hey, this is what the property sold for, this much in seller concessions if there are any, that sort of thing. And then if it's different than what the appraiser has received from the lender, they can question it. And we want to do that ahead of time before the report gets completed, and lo and behold, it comes in at what we thought was the purchase price, and that isn't the actual price.
Yeah, that's a great point. And this, I think, is related to contracts, the collateral, but maybe more on the credit side. But from an agent perspective, from a contract perspective, we never want to include the personal property or the transferring of personal property as part of that because one, it could be looked at as an inducement to sell, even if it's insignificant. Let's just not even raise that red flag from an underwriter perspective. And two, the appraiser's not going to put any value on it. So if that's being determined in the value or part of it, maybe have a separate deed of sale there or something, not deed of sale, but a separate.
Yeah, you want to try to keep that separate from the transaction at hand, which is the transfer of the home, the actual real estate. So, the common items that convey, the appliances, that sort of thing, standard practice, no problem there at all.
So, standard items that are conveying are items that are permanently affixed to the property.
Yes, and in some cases, though, even freestanding appliances. What is normal for that market? Okay, we've got a freestanding stove, fridge, washer, dryer, that sort of thing. That's not a problem.
Okay, cool. I remembered where I was going to go before. So with the items needing work or remediation, like you mentioned, sometimes you take care of it before the appraisal comes out. A lot of times, to protect themselves, the buyers are getting home inspections, and a lot of times I'm seeing sellers actually starting to get home inspections prior to listing the property, so that they can then understand, assess, and make some of those updates or repairs on their own terms instead of being forced to make that decision. I've seen it a couple different ways, but one of the things I wanted to mention is that when you look at the mortgage process as a whole, I think historically it has been a very linear process. So you start at point A and you can't get to point Z until you go through every single check mark. And the reality is that we work concurrently with a lot of our paths. And so what that allows us to do is take a standard 30, 45 day window and be able to do it in 15 days or 20 days, because we're not waiting on all these things to happen before we can now go down this path. The home inspection specifically in some areas I know is something where we'll wait on the appraisal to order the home inspection, or wait to order the appraisal until the home inspection is complete. What I'd say is that if that's the case in your market, do not wait to order the appraisal. I want to order that appraisal at the same time that that home inspection is moving forward, because that's sometimes a week, 10 days that we're missing. And if for whatever reason the deal blows up because of the home inspection and we're not going to need that appraisal, that's cost of doing business for us. That's worth the investment to save that week or two and not have to go back. We're not going to go back to the customers and charge them for that nickel and dime them, but we're saving 2 weeks there because of the fact that we just recognize that that's such an important piece of the process.
Yeah, certainly. And you know, if the contract gets amended over that home inspection results, that's probably something we can push back to the appraiser.
Update, right?
Easier.
Yep.
With that in mind, if you're going to modify a contract due to home inspection results, be careful how you phrase that in your addendum. If you're just going to lower the price or add concessions or something, maybe state that. If you're going to spell out what was the cause of this, and simply don't reference the home inspection, because that's a trigger now of, oh, what were the concerns in the home inspection? So better off just saying the terms have been modified to this. You don't need an explanation why, but as soon as you start referencing a document, that could cause a lender to take a deeper dive.
Cool, cool. What else am I not asking you about? I feel like
well, let me finish out the sort of tips for
Sorry.
successful appraiser engagement from the agent's portion of it. You know, we've seen a lot of multiple offer situations in these markets. It typically happens in the springtime here, pent up demand, and boom. Make sure you're sharing that information with the appraiser. That doesn't mean you necessarily need to show them copies of pending contract offers, that sort of thing. But it's important that if that property listed for $200,000 and it went for $220 in 48 hours with 6 people bidding it up, that information get out there to the appraiser, so they understand that there is strong market demand for this property, and maybe the sales that are out there don't tell the whole story.
Can we go on a little bit of a tangent as it relates to that? So the effective date of the appraisal is when that value is really a snapshot in time of what that value is, and that can change drastically, especially in really hot markets or depressed markets where we're increasing or decreasing consistently. And one of the I think difficulties just in general is knowing that that value is a snapshot in time, but it's only looking backwards and not forward, right? So that anticipation of, hey, the market's increasing at X percent, well, getting the appraisal and the valuation to acknowledge, recognize that increase is difficult when you can only base it off of sold properties that took place in the past, but not pendings because they technically haven't sold yet. Right. So is that what you're talking about in terms of there are 6 offers on this property and helping to establish it that way?
Exactly. So leveraging, okay, well, we can't put all our eggs in one basket with pendings and listings. They become an important role in supporting the trend of values. And to that end, not only leveraging as an agent when you provide information back to that appraiser, those closed sales and pendings and listings, take a look at the statistical trends that you can find through your local MLS, that sort of thing, and support the case that, hey, over the last 12 months, we've seen a 6% increase in this market segment. That can build that information to say, yeah, these closed sales don't tell the whole story. So 100%.
Cool, cool.
Yeah. I think really that's about all I had here. Relevant sales, that's a whole nother podcast in and of itself when we get into comparables.
Okay, I appreciate the feedback and being able to get a little more in depth and into different aspects of the process. Hopefully you found that this was helpful in some capacity. This is the very first of what's going to be a series of conversations about really anything and everything. You know, anytime we've got an opportunity to absorb as much as possible from someone like yourself, someone that's very knowledgeable, knows what they're doing with a very specific aspect of the process, I think it's going to be really valuable. So thank you for taking the time and for kicking it off. And I hope everyone enjoyed this. If you've got suggestions or feedback on how we can improve different topics that you want to cover in the future, please let us know. But otherwise, Neal, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.
We'll see you soon. Bye.